Recently I saw on Facebook a meme that said what was going on in Israel right now in regard to Gaza was something that would determine the timing of the return of Jesus Christ. I wonder if these people who produced that meme have actually read the book of Zechariah, because Zechariah does not say that. In fact, he says something quite different to that. Let's have a look now at the messianic prophecies in the book of Zechariah. Zechariah is an exilic prophet. That is, he has come out of the exile and he is a part of the first returnees from Babylon, Persia, back into Jerusalem and Judea. He prophesies that God would bring back many other exiles. God would bring them back. This return of the people that is recorded in the prophecies of the book of Zechariah related to historic events that actually we can now see did happen. By the time of Christ, Jerusalem was indeed populated. It was the land of Judea, was populated. The northern kingdom, even apart from the territory of Samaria, was also populated with Jews. So the prophecies that Zechariah gave about people from the southern kingdom being summoned back into the land by God had indeed happened. But the prophecies that are profound in the book of Zechariah relate to the coming Messiah. So the coming Messiah had clearly, Zechariah is presenting a magnificent vision of what Christ, the Anointed One, which is what the word Christ means. The word is also Messiah, the Promised One. So Christ means Anointed One, Messiah, Promised One. When he was to come, his mission was not simply to rescue Jerusalem and Israel. His mission was to save the world. And in doing that, he would lay claim not just to the land of Israel, but to all the earth. Let's have a look. I want to show you this. So we're picking it up as we have finished off in chapter 8. Now we're picking it up in chapter 9. So here we have this remarkable thing. I remind you in Zechariah chapter 6 verse 12 that the prophet Zechariah predicted the coming Messiah as the branch. That was the title he was given, the branch. Now, it's an interesting play on words that the branch sounds like Nazarene, and that's what Jesus was known as, someone from Nazareth, a Nazarene. And so we see that in Zechariah that the Messiah would be called the shepherd, the tent peg, and the cornerstone. These are all New Testament concepts that we'll have a look at in a moment. So in Zechariah chapter 9 and verse 9, it says this: "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem." Why? Because, behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Well, of course, we know that this is exactly what happened in the New Testament. Jesus entered into Jerusalem exactly on the colt, the foal of a donkey. So we have this prophecy by Zechariah that was fulfilled by Christ. Now, it's worth noting, we'll come back down to the last part of this section in a moment. Here we have in verses 16 and 17 of chapter 9 the description that the Messiah would be the true shepherd. It says, "On that day the Lord their God will save them as the flock of his people. For like the jewels of a crown, they shall shine in his land. For how great is his goodness, and how great his beauty. Grain shall make the young men flourish, and new wine the young women." So these grain and wine are pictures of prosperity and peace. In other words, when Messiah comes, this would be the picture, that he would bring prosperity of soul and peace. So this is the forecast that Zechariah is giving of Messiah. We see that he would be called, it says in chapter 10 and verse 4, for from him shall come the cornerstone, from him the tent peg. Now, this expression that Messiah shall be the cornerstone is repeated, and in fact, as having been fulfilled in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 20, where it describes Christ as the cornerstone, Jesus himself being the cornerstone. And it says, as we've already seen in chapter 6 verse 12 about the branch, that it would be the branch who would actually build the real temple. And as we see in Ephesians chapter 2 verses 20 down to verse 22, that temple that the Messiah built was not of bricks and mortar, but of people. He himself was the temple, and he says that he had come to build the temple. And the Apostle Paul says that that temple was people. And so that's the church. So the kind of temple that Messiah was to build, according to Zechariah, was a temple of people. And we've said already that a temple is where God and man meet. And when people come to church, the gathering of the church, this is where God and man would meet. We see in Zechariah chapter 11 that the prophet actually said that the old covenant, the covenant that Moses had established with Israel, the covenant that all the 12 tribes had affirmed that they would keep, it says in verse 10, and I took my staff, favor, and I broke it, annulling the covenant that I had made with all the peoples. Down to verse 14, then I broke my second staff, union, annulling the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. So here we have Zechariah prophesying that the covenant that Israel had with God would be completely annulled. Now we've already seen in the book of Jeremiah that Jeremiah warned the people of Judah that if they, unless they repented and turned to him, that God would divorce them as he had already done with the 10 northern tribes, the northern kingdom. And so Zechariah is not saying anything new. This is exactly what the other prophets had said. And we see that when Christ came, the old covenant was indeed made obsolete. And according to Hebrews 8, verse 13, it had been made obsolete. And at the time of the writing of the epistle to the Hebrews, it was yet to be done away with. And we know that ultimately when the physical temple was destroyed, that brought the old covenant to an end. We see in Zechariah 11, verses 12 and 13, this amazing prophecy that Messiah would come and he would be rejected. And not just rejected, but sold and betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, which is exactly what the scriptures say in Matthew chapter 26, verse 15, that Judas did that. He betrayed Christ, representing all Israel. He betrayed Christ for 30 pieces of silver. And it says, then I said to them, if it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out as my wages 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. So we have the betrayal of Christ. We have Christ entering Jerusalem to be coronated, but riding on a donkey. What was the point of his coronation? How was Christ coronated? By his death. We see in Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 10, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly for him as one weeps over a firstborn. And we see this in John chapter 19, verse 37, where John says that prophecy of the Messiah being pierced was fulfilled by Christ on the cross. How was Christ coronated as king? When he was crucified. And we see in Revelation chapter 1 verse 7 that it cites the Zechariah passage as well. In fact, the book of Revelation cites Zechariah perhaps more than any other minor prophet. And we see in Zechariah chapter 13 verse 1, on that day there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. So when Christ died on the cross, he was atoning for the sins of the world. And the first people to hear about it on the day of Pentecost were the occupants of Jerusalem. And they, it says, 3,000 of them turned to Christ and accepted his forgiveness. And that began the cleansing prophesied by Zechariah here in chapter 13 verse 1. And that same thing is stated before that in Zechariah chapter 9 and verse 11. And also, and for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. The waterless pit being striving to keep the law, which couldn't save anyone. But the Messiah would come and he would be the atoning sacrifice for all people, offering forgiveness of sin, offering cleansing from uncleanness. So we see here that Jesus didn't come just to save Jews or to redeem Israel and Judea from Roman occupation. In fact, he came to lay claim to the whole earth. The whole earth. The whole earth. It says in Zechariah, reading from Zechariah 9 and verse 10, this amazing prediction that where Christ would rule, the extent of his rule. It says, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to nations. He shall speak peace to the nations. You wonder what the solution to the war in Gaza is? The gospel of Jesus Christ, bringing both Jew and Palestinian to know Christ. He is their peace, if only they would see it and accept it. And it says, his rule, get this, his rule, the rule of the Messiah, shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. What's the solution to the war in Palestine, Gaza? The gospel. For both Jew and Gentile, Palestinian, Muslim, whatever people's allegiance to whatever they have, to be renounced and for them to turn to Christ, to accept the gospel. That's the solution. He is the one, Zechariah said, who will bring peace. But notice this, leading up to the cross, we have this amazing account in Zechariah that Jesus would be betrayed. We've seen that with Judas. But then, not only would he be betrayed, but that his disciples would be scattered for fear. We see in Zechariah 13 verse 7, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord of hosts. Of course, Jesus in John chapter 10 said that he was the good shepherd. He's referring to the prophecy of Zechariah. And we see down at verse 9, and I will put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver and test them as gold is tested. But what will be the result? They will call upon my name and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God. So here we have, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. And that passage was quoted in Mark's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 27. And now, what's the extent of the rule of Christ? We see here in Zechariah chapter 14 verse 9, and the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one, and his name one. Hebrew word echad, one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is echad, one. And here Zechariah is saying, Jesus is the Lord. He is the Lord God. He's not just the Son of God, he's God the Son, who came as the atoning sacrifice, the one who would be the true shepherd, the true cornerstone, the one who would be the God who would rule over and reign over the whole earth. And right now, he is. People in just about every corner of the planet have heard the gospel and are turning to Christ. And it's my prayer that you will too. And I hope that you can see that in this second last book of the Old Testament, this exilic prophet, we've got one more to go, that's Malachi, that you'll see now that Zechariah, for the first 8 chapters, was calling the people to a repentance. And then he was pointing to the Messiah, the coming Messiah. So with that, I would just like to encourage you to hit like, to share this with someone who perhaps is confused about what the Bible has to say about the end times. And may they begin to see that the end times is focused on Jesus, not on Israel. It's all about Jesus and what he's done. And that's what the prophet Zechariah had foretold as well. In our next installment, we're going to have a look at the last book of the Old Testament. That's the book of Malachi. And we're going to dive just a little bit deeper into this very, very significant book. I hope to see you then. And if you could, please, if you haven't subscribed, please hit subscribe. Give it a like, hit the notification bell, and you'll see me in our next installment in the post-exilic biblical literature, the book of the prophets.